Now we want to have a session. I'm going to invite Izar Shai to hold the next session. We called it Innovation Nations. And after that, we're going to have, after that, we'll have part of this. We're still waiting for Ariel Margalit to come here. He's coming straight from the Knesset. He cuts the end of the Knesset meeting in order to make it here to you. You're more important. First of all, I would like to invite Izar Shai. Izar Shai is a partner at Canaan Partners, but he's here today because he's one of the best moderators in the high-tech industry, and he also writes for Startup Stadium.
Thank you, Yael. In the startup world, you under-promise and over-deliver. What you have just done is just quite the opposite, so I'm in big troubles now. Happy to be here, and thank you all for attending. We are going to have a two-phase session, right? I'm inviting Commander Z after having a conversation with the distinguished ambassadors. Is that the way we do this? But we are going to speak about innovation. We are going to speak about branding, innovation, and how do you create a nation with an innovative culture and the promoting of innovation throughout various systems. For this, we have two distinguished guests with us today. The Honorary Carl Magnus Nesser, who is the Ambassador of Sweden in Israel. Mr. Ambassador, please join us here. And the Honorary Mr. Eammon McKee, the Ambassador of Ireland. Both Sweden and Ireland have a high degree of innovation in various angles. Some of them were actually researched and published in recent analysis and research, and we are going to try to get there if we are lucky and have enough time. And if Ariel Margalit is going to be late, we are going to be even luckier. By the way, I attended an event this week, and they were waiting for people to come for the Knesset. You can give up hope. That never happens. So I think we are going to start with Ambassador McKee of...
which is, we see ourselves as a startup nation. I spent 4 years in Korea, which most people would see is a very innovative country as well. And now I come to Israel, so I've got three perspectives on this. And I think a number of points. The first is that in some ways innovation is less new than some people think. Very often what it is, it's putting together what you have already in different kind of ways. And in Ireland, Irish economic development really starts around the same time as it begins in Israel, in the post-World War II period. The problem was that we didn't have an industrial base. Our industrial base was partitioned off in Northern Ireland. So we really were just a one big farm exporting food to Britain. This made it very difficult for us to begin to have an industrial base. And what we did and decided to do in the 1950s was to import capital through foreign direct investment. We really began with screwdriver stuff. But we had a couple of things which went our way. One, we had an English-speaking population. We had free education, so they're educated. Two, we had Irish Americans in boardrooms all across North America. Three, we had access to the European Union as a market. So we became a very important platform for foreign direct investment. We have a tax rate of 12.5% on all trading profits. But it was a combination of those events. The trick, though, was not simply just accepting that, but constantly changing what it was these companies were doing and what we wanted to do with those companies. So, for example, as the head of our IDA, our Industrial Development Authority, says, if these international companies are doing today in Ireland what they did when they arrived in Ireland 10 years ago, they have a short shelf life. So you have to constantly change. So, for example, Intel starts off with screwdriver stuff in Ireland, but now it's moved into services, research, customer service and backup and those kind of things. Very good example as well is the Dublin Web Summit. Young Trinity graduate, Paddy Cosgrave. 3 years ago, he started the Dublin Web Summit. 450 people turn up. Last October, 10,000 people turned up in 3 years. But last year, they decided, well, let's add in a good food summit in parallel with this, because food and beverage is a huge export from Ireland, a huge indigenous export. Then they added in what they call the Night Summit, which is a fancy word for basically a pub crawl. But in the middle of that pub crawl, you have the head of an Irish startup company, DataHug, ends up having a pint with the head of, I think it was, I can't remember offhand, but some Google or Yahoo or somebody like that in a pub. So in some ways, what you have in Ireland in terms of innovation is you're putting together things that are already there. A couple of years ago, we went to look at what they do for innovation in Sweden, Austria, and Finland, and we discovered what they do is they were putting together research centres, private industry, and universities. And so we've created 15 centres where this collaboration happens, and things you don't expect come out of that. So, for example, most universities, when they do a research project, will do a research project for 3 to 4 years. These companies said, no, we need a research project that goes on from 12 months to 18 months max. So that's what they focus on. So you can borrow stuff, you can put stuff together, and out of that you create synergies, So it's constantly, in Ireland, I think it's constantly changing. And when we had 5 startup companies come here for the DLD conference, that's what I found really exciting about these young people, is that they're constantly disrupting what's going on, because only by disrupting do you create the new realities and the new demands. And it's like they're not just investing in the future. If you're investing in coffee bean future market or whatever, you're trying to predict what the future is going to do. What's really exciting about these young Irish people is that they're shaping what you're going to do. They're deciding this is how life is going to be lived and how we can change things. So they're disruptive, and I think this is the other point which Ireland and Israel have in common, is this disruptive energy. We won our independence after 800 years of struggle. We only got our independence in 1921. We have in our DNA this idea of rebelling and not accepting authority. Unfortunately, because
this is not Israel, by the way. We accept authority. We are very much.
So I've heard. Yeah. But we've lost so many people, so many young people, through immigration, because we had very, very heavy immigration from after the Great Famine in the 1840s, but all the way through the 20th century. But now we're keeping our young people there, and then some of these young people, they go abroad for experience and come back. So at the moment we have a really buzzing high-tech startup sector now in Dublin around what we call the digital docklands area.
Ambassador McKee, could you help us with some metrics there, if you have the feeling for metrics? We heard so much about multinational corporations who have put their R&D or business centers in Ireland. We hear so much about innovation and startups. Any numbers that you can share with us, if you have the feeling of how many international corporations they have there, how many startup companies are established in Ireland on an annual basis and so on?
Yeah, well, we have, I think, 1,000 companies in Ireland, and that would include all of the big ones. So we have Google, Yahoo, Facebook, we have PayPal, we have biopharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, all basically at the high end of things, and they employ about 150,000 people in Ireland. I think Google have set up a research centre. Intel have a research centre in a research campus in Leixlip, for example, and that's becoming more pronounced, because one of the differences, I think, between Ireland and Israel was that Israel tended to focus on the research end of things, particularly with Technion and Haifa, whereas in Ireland we tended to do the more service end of things. But it's beginning now to get the research end is beginning now to get traction.
Great. So I think we stop here, and thank you for pointing at the similarities, backgrounds of the nations, relatively young, independent states, both here and in Ireland, and the entrepreneurial culture. Why don't we turn back to you, Ambassador Nesser? I think you prepared a presentation for us, and then we take it from there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's really a great Pleasure to be here. Thank you to Yael for inviting me, and thank you very much, Hisar, for the introduction. I think for me it's been a great experience coming to Israel. I was posted here in April of last year. My first day, I arrived in the airport. I sat in the VIP lounge. I was met by the state protocol, and I waited because 2 hours later, one of the most important Swedish businessmen, Jacob Wallenberg, arrived with the delegation. So my first order of business, if you will, since arriving, was to go around with him, to meet the president, to go to visit Errol Margalit's exciting campus for the Jerusalem Venture partners, and so on and so on. So if you will, my first few hesitant baby steps here in Israel were focused on innovation, and I think this is the big theme. This is really what we are trying to do on the trade promotion side. We have a very robust trade relationship. We are selling for 3 billion to Israel. We're importing for 1 billion, and we just put Israel on the list of 20 countries which are priority markets for Swedish exports. So we are looking at increasing this cooperation as much as possible.
I think that deserves a round of applause. Being first wonderful 20. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I prepared a few slides, in fact. The first one, of course, they are quite you know, PR PR focused, if you will, and quite simplistic, of course. This is just an introduction, of course, but some innovations deserve attention. I think this really doesn't say anything more than the fact that we have a very long tradition of innovation in Sweden. Sweden was one of the poorest countries in Europe, and then around 120, 130 years ago, something happened with the Industrial Revolution, with the development of infrastructure in Sweden and so on. And lots of innovations were launched by that generation of people, which included Alfred Nobel, of course, the inventor of dynamite, and who later donated his large fortune to the Nobel Prize. So in his generation, innovation was taking off in Sweden, and it has continued like that, of course. Sweden ranks very highly on a number of indexes, and in the material for this session, Yael has mentioned some of these.
Let's just make sure we understand this. So you're number one out of 131 countries in innovation capacity.
Yes, exactly. We're number 2 on the Global Innovation Index and number 1 on the Global Creativity Index, and so on and so on. I mean, there are probably 20, 30 different indexes. We usually rank highly on these innovation indexes. And I'll come to the backside, to the minus in just a minute. Why is Sweden such an innovative country? I think my Irish colleague has given some clues as to the extraordinary innovation takeoff in Ireland. We believe that there are a number of reasons. First of all, stable financial markets. You have access to capital. Second of all, you have a skilled workforce with a generally very high level of secondary education and so on. You have a smooth border administration, which is important for an export-dependent country. You have state-of-the-art infrastructure, and we have the EU membership, which we think have been very important, just as my Irish colleague mentioned. Looking at the issue of connectivity and infrastructure, I think this is an important point. I just celebrated in the autumn the 15th anniversary of Ericsson in Israel. Ericsson is the world's largest, of course, purveyor of telephone systems, and they have worked with perhaps some of you in this, and they are now in the process of working on the 4G shift here. Sweden, of course, has one thing that is both good and bad. We have a very long distance between different cities and towns and so on. So there has always been a large need for solid transportation and communications networks. In the year 1900, to return to this older generation of innovators that I mentioned a moment ago, Stockholm had more telephones in absolute numbers than London, Paris, or Berlin. So we were very early on a leader in telecommunications. Today, Sweden has the most computer and internet users per capita in the world. According to the CIA World Factbook, Sweden is ranked among the leading countries for cell phone, internet, and broadband penetration. We have the most wireless internet hotspots per capita in the world, and we have a nationwide network of roads, railroads, waterways, harbors, and airports, which outperforms any other European country, according to our own Invest in Sweden agency. So, on the network side, on the communication side, it looks very good. We have the second highest R&D spending in the OECD, after, interestingly, Israel, of course. And you are by far the leader, the worldwide leader, as you know. This is really incredibly inspiring, of course. But we are the second, and we are well above the 2.2% of GDP that is the OECD average. We have 3.6, and you have 4.7, something like that. So we believe that we are picking up, but it's really extremely interesting, and part of my...
How will you pick up? Is the government providing any incentives? Are there any private ventures that will promote spending in R&D and innovation?
Yes, I'll come to that in a minute. I think what we have is a quite unique mix of government and private sector funding, and as the ambassador of Ireland alluded to, also the universities in a very strong, historically very strong link to the industry here. But 75% of the country's R&D investments derive from the private sector, which I think is interesting, and it's a little bit more in Israel, in fact, so we have that in common. Half of all the money spent on research and development come from the engineering industry. Yeah. This is a picture of some Swedish companies that you may recognize. You have here ABB, the world's biggest supplier of power grids, IKEA, which you have here in Netanya, of course, the world's biggest home furnishing retailer, Sandvik, the world's largest maker of metal cutting tools, Ericsson, the world's leading cell phone network provider, SSAB, the world's largest supplier of high tensile steel, AstraZeneca, a major pharmaceutical company, and Volvo, the world's second biggest truck maker, and so on and so on. So you have all these big and actually quite old companies, and this is perhaps where we need to focus more, and where this the Swedish government is trying to refocus its energies into creating more of entrepreneurship. How do you translate all this innovation into growth and entrepreneurship? And this is where we look for innovative solutions. And we're a small country, and you are all very welcome to cooperate with us. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Ambassador. This was great. What's the population of Sweden?
9.4 million.
9.4 million. You know, I did not intend to ask you this, but we have an ongoing, long-time debate here as to how to create big companies, which we are not so good at. We nurture them, we promote them, we innovate, and then we sell them. Any tip that you could give us? You know, you have high-tech executives here who are trying to build big companies. You have built so many of them, and you have the same size of population, not so far from here. What are we missing?
Well, it's an interesting question, because we are now, of course, trying to turn all this innovation also into new big companies, because those we have are quite old. So this is where we are looking. I mean, we have lots of, public seed money. We have special programs focused on women entrepreneurs. We are trying to focus on some sectors, such as life science and so on and so on. We believe that this is working, but it's taking time.
Well, it is working by the slide you just showed us. It looks great, as looking at the past and also hoping into the future. Ambassador McKee, you and I spoke on Friday as the news about the Viber acquisition were just unfolding, so yet another Israeli company being sold, and again, innovation at its best. How important is innovation in your work, promoting Irish innovation? You know, there are so many aspects of the Irish culture that you're very proud of, and we spoke about this. There is the Irish folk and the Irish culture, and so many Irish aspects of being Irish. And you're representing a country and a nation, and you're doing your work as an ambassador. What part of your work does innovation and the context of innovation occupy as you are promoting your country?
Yeah, I mean, we have 4.4 million Irish people, but it was interesting in 1845, before the Great Famine, we had 8 million people, and our population still hasn't recovered from the Great Irish Famine, because it was a devastating ecological event, but it meant that it set up a pattern of immigration, mainly to England, America, Australia, but all around the world. So today we have 70 million people around the world of Irish ancestry. And we have managed, when you talk about innovation and innovation in public diplomacy, we've managed to tap into that. We began in the 1980s to offer funding to immigrant groups, particularly on the welfare front for undocumented Irish in America, for older Irish people who had spent their lives working in England on building sites and found themselves kind of isolated and so on. And then it developed into what is now the Global Irish Network, where we take leading people in business who have Irish ancestry. They sign up to be members of, they're asked actually to be members of the Global Irish Network. They come to Dublin at their own expense for regular forums hosted by the government to give us advice on what we need to do. But we're tapping into this and mobilising this great Irish diaspora on Ireland's behalf. It gives us data on markets. It gives us ideas for some of the best brains in business. My own Department of Foreign Affairs, we've begun really extensively to use social media quite well. We do it in Twitter. Some of us have blogs. A very interesting thing is this St. Patrick's Day, 17th of March. There's only 2 times the American president goes to Congress. One, he goes for the State of the Union address, and the second time he goes is for the St. Patrick's Day lunch with the Speaker of the House. Our Prime Minister goes to Washington, presents a bowl of shamrock, and I worked in the embassy in Washington for a long time. I can tell you the biggest pain in the neck was to get fresh Irish shamrock arriving that didn't look like A, cannabis, but B, that didn't smell from Ireland, presented in a bowl to the President. But this kind of access and this kind of profile is quite amazing. And I think Chicago is one of the first countries, or one of the first cities to do this. They dye the river green in Chicago. And now we have the global greening. So we have, I think Petra is going green, the Sydney Opera House. We hope I think Disneyland, Empire State Building, all around the world. We have buildings turning green. So this is kind of marketing.
You just gave us a challenge next year in Tel Aviv.
There you go. We have to find somewhere to go green. But it's so yeah, it's great to see it in our department as well, as where we're using Twitter and we're using LinkedIn and we're using blogs to try and spread the message. And we find that actually as well for consular emergencies is actually very useful to have people hooked up, so that when I was in Seoul, for example, this time, April of last year, CNN seemed to think there was going to be a global conflict starting in Korea. It was actually a bit irresponsible, to be honest, because it was nonsense. But it meant that we were able to communicate not only with our Irish community in Korea, but with worried Irish mothers back in Dublin who thought that their son who was teaching English in Korea was going to be bombed by North Korea. We used Twitter and our embassy account to contact people. The other thing we find, though, and I found this in Korea too, what social media does now for embassies is that it can create synergies, where you can create projects. You put out a message about something. I put out a message about the Irish involvement in the Korean War, which nobody really knew about, and suddenly we had people connecting with us, which created a project involving the embassy, a commemorative organisation called the Somme Association, plus elements of the British Army, plus the local Irish Association of Korea. And out of that, which really came from the internet and from emails being exchanged, we ended up establishing a monument in the Seoul War Memorial to the Irish who died in the war, bringing back veterans from the Korean War who hadn't been back in Seoul since 1951. So this is a sign of where this will go for governments and for foreign departments, is using this to create synergies and projects. What we find is you don't need to have the Irish Association meet in a committee room or the back in an Irish pub anymore. You can do all of this by either meetups, or you can do it virtually using the internet. It's an amazing tool for public diplomacy.
He just gave me an idea, which I'm going to try later. You mentioned digital media and all kinds of stuff. That means that you also are familiar with how to use gadgets, WhatsApp, phones, and so on.
Well, I'm a bit of a Luddite, but I had a very young deputy head of mission in Korea.
You're setting yourself for a travel, so be careful with...
Yeah,
Yeah.
she started the Twitter account, and then she went on holidays for 2 weeks. And I'm saying, if I don't start sending out tweets, I look like an awful idiot. So I had to learn how to send out tweets. And I knew she was checking up, and her husband was checking up and telling her, yeah, he's sending out some tweets now, so we're keeping it going. So I was forced into it. But
do you know what a selfie is?
Yes, I do know what a selfie is,
Okay,
and
we'll
I
try
know
it
what
on that.
Snapchat is, and
Okay,
I know
great.
what
Yeah,
app is, because my daughters all use this stuff.
We have all these photographers, and I'm thinking, what is the best picture for tomorrow's newspaper? So I think we'll ask you to take a selfie of both of you.
Yeah, I need
That
one for
will
my
make them-
Twitter account. Yeah,
That would be great. So we'll try that in a second. That will be a test of the Irish ambassador in Israel. Do you know or you don't know to handle a
get these.
selfie?
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Ambassadors, we are almost running out of time, so I think that what I'll ask you is to give us a tip or a number of tips. All of us feel like high-tech ambassadors. We are representing Israel innovation and high-tech when we travel outside of Israel, and that happens to us pretty frequently. And this is the notion that has been promoted here in South Shmona in this conference for many years, but also is the notion of many Israeli high-tech executives. We feel like we represent our country, even if we go just on business meetings, wherever we go. I would appreciate your tips as professional diplomats and professional representatives of your countries. What is that we should tell? What is that we should promote? If you could give us 2 or 3 bullets, each of you, as to how do you expect to see us representing our country, either in your country or in other places. Ambassador Nesser, would you like to go first?
Well, thank you very much. I think the startup phenomenon is very well known. I think the Israel as a true innovation center is very well known. So just talk about your ideas, talk about your services and products. I think will go a very long way, to be honest, and then you will find very interested listeners. We have this year, I think, focused already on the Clean Tech Fair that opens tomorrow. So this will be an opportunity for all those who visit that out at Airport City to learn more about the Swedish clean tech sector. And we are looking forward to launching a big delegation to the Biomed Life Science Fair combined with the high-tech industry in May. So thank you very much.
All right, so the buzzwords were clean tech, innovation, high-tech, and speak about the new things that are coming up. That will go a long way. Thank you. Mr.
I think investing and they're a bit like elections. People vote on the future. And people buy into the future. And in some ways, I think Israel is very like Ireland. We're making our own future. And one of the things we have done for decades in Irish diplomacy was selling the future. The first thing that we had, a big difficulty we had in Ireland, selling foreign direct investment into Ireland, for example, in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, was we had conflict in Northern Ireland. So how do you get people to invest in a country that's suffering from a conflict? What you do is you sell the future. You're selling peace. You're selling development. You're selling the solution of problems. And in Ireland, once we had the peace, there was a point at which, when we had the first ceasefires in the Northern Ireland peace process in 1994, this is when really all of the investment that we had put in our economy in terms of investment really began to take off. It wasn't, I think, a direct connection with conflict, but it was this sense that we are now moving into a future where Ireland's future is bright. We do have problems, but we're going to solve these problems, and we're going to use any means that we can. We're going to be fresh and innovative in doing that kind of thing. I think Israel is, in a sense, at the similar kind of speed bump moment where it's got. I was at a briefing about McKee conference, and one of the themes that they were talking about was beyond the startup nation, because what you don't want is you don't want to be just known as the startup nation. You want to say we have to go beyond the startup nation. So in a sense, diplomacy is about selling the future. What is the future, and what are people going to buy when they buy into the relationship with Israel? How do you describe your future? What do you see it as, and what are you selling? Because that's what people buy. They buy the future, you know.
Great answer. Thank you, Ambassador McKee, but it did not save you from using a selfie. Could you please sit here by Ambassador Nesser? I'm going to hand you my iPhone. No tricks here. And let's see, how do you perform? I promise you this picture will be on Startup Stadium. It will be in various venues, and it will look great if you just do as you should. You have to look at both of you, and you have to smile nicely. Maybe you see. No, this is you two taking. Do you remember? There's a guy called President Obama. He did the same with the lady and got into troubles. You're doing the same with the other ambassador? You have the lady there, exactly. You start with yourself. You have to push your hand forward. Smile, Yael, smile. Somebody has to press the button. Did you take the picture? It was a good one. Excellent. Excellent job. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador Nesser, Ambassador McKee. Great job. Thank you.